Earlier today, I spoke with you about the importance of having difficult and vulnerable conversations with our loved ones about what's important to them, what they value, what they care about, what their ethical will would be that they want us to inherit, and about what they want at the end of their life and when they die. We have had many people in our congregation who've lost loved ones in this past year, and just in the last couple of hours, several of you have come to me to share vulnerably something of the stories that you have experienced and the things that you're holding with your loved ones now. I've asked 3 members of our congregation during the course of our afternoon service to share something of their story. They're each friends and members who have lost loved ones in the last year. And I'm grateful to them for being willing to share their stories vulnerably with us. Our first speaker is Ben Hakim.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ben Hakim. My wife Laura and I have been part of the Shrek community for over 20 years, and we're actually excited to celebrate our third and youngest child's bar mitzvah here in a couple of weeks for Daniel. Unfortunately, as the rabbi had mentioned, his sermon today is very near and dear to my heart, as I lost both of my parents recently. My mom passed away 4 years ago, and my dad nearly 3 months ago. Both had long illnesses, enduring countless times spent in the hospital and years of care with living aides. As background, I come from a very close-knit Persian family, and my 2 brothers and I were intimately involved with managing every aspect of our parents' medical care. We are fortunate in that we all live locally, and we had the resources and access to terrific doctors and hospitals to ensure they received the best possible medical care. That allowed us to spend a lot of quality time together during their final years. However, while we all devoted an enormous amount of time and energy into their care, my brothers and I had some different views on priorities during their terminal illnesses. My brothers were very focused on trying every possible medical idea in an effort to keep fighting until the very end, despite the tremendous suffering my parents were enduring. And while I also desperately searched for a better outcome, I placed a greater emphasis on their quality of life during those final days, months, and years. Interestingly, both of my parents had full mental capacity at the time of their passing, and I spoke to them daily about every possible subject, with the exception of their wishes and preferences for end-of-life medical care. I still struggle with why we didn't discuss this topic. Part of the reason may have been cultural, but also perhaps a desire by my parents to put on a brave face for their family. But that lack of clarity ultimately created additional stress and confusion during those already incredibly difficult times, since we did not have an agreed-upon plan. The lesson for me in all this is to not burden my wife or kids with this overwhelming responsibility, to be clear about my values and what I expect at end of life, and to have a plan both medically and financially to minimize the stress for my family. That is, of course, easier said than done, as I have not yet done that type of planning. But I hope that the rabbi asking me to speak about this topic can motivate me to put this realization into action, even though I don't intend on going anywhere anytime soon. Thank you.
It's my privilege to invite forward our next congregant friend to share, Jennifer Seidman.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Serendipitously or fortuitously, Rabbi Mosbacher reached out to me about speaking today, the afternoon after I was jolted awake at 3 a.m. by a phone call. Calls at 3 a.m. are never good ones, and this one was to inform me that my dad, my biological dad, was in the hospital. After learning of his stable condition, I lay awake thinking about all the inevitabilities. What will I do when his time actually comes? I don't even know what his wishes are, and I don't know how to ask. These thoughts are raw because not too long ago, or exactly at 5 a.m. on March 12th, I received a similar phone call. But the words shared were, "He died." I'm still haunted by my mother's voice sharing that my father, he was always a father and never a step, had passed. After a recent and rapid decline from a decade-long battle with Parkinson's, Arthur, my Buzzy, my parallel name for Daddy, passed. I remember thinking at Shiva, supporting my mom, that as difficult as this moment was, this would be the easiest one. Every detail or question we had was answered through the lens of what would Buzzy have wanted. My mom and I are not ones for pomp and circumstance, but when we learned that Arthur could receive an honor guard at the burial for his service as a reservist, we thought, yes, he would love that, and it turned out we loved it too. I'm an only child blessed with 3 parents with an unbelievable attachment to my mother. Think Gilmore Girls. So when we lost Buzzy, we had each other to comfort, and we focused solely on memorializing him. No homes needed to be closed, no travel needed to be figured out. Burial plots had been purchased, and a local Jewish chapel was secured. Although I do wish we could have avoided the scavenger hunt looking for his military documents. And yes, there were comforting talks with our own clergy to help me navigate the rituals to come. I'll never forget reaching out to Rabbi Sarah and saying, "I don't know what to do." And she said, "That's okay, because we do." But still, I am not prepared for the next ones, not logistically for the one 3,000 miles away, and not emotionally for the one much closer to home in my heart. Having the paperwork figured out in advance will be helpful, so as hard as it is to ask the hard questions. But ultimately, my heart doesn't have a roadmap to follow. Thank you.
Please be seated. Our third and final speaker for this afternoon will be our friend and our fellow member, Cliff Schneider.
Good afternoon. It was a portion of Rabbi Mosbacher's very moving sermon this morning that took me off my pre-printed script, sent me home, and required me to find a quote from Mr. Rogers. So I found the whole quote. Haven't thought of that since I was a little kid. Anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they are less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can let us know that we're not alone. We've been members here for 10 years. We've enjoyed nursery school, Hebrew school. We're about to celebrate our oldest son's bar mitzvah this May, but it wasn't until I experienced the loss this past February where I really felt like I was home and not alone. My mother, Wanda Schneider, Chana Bat Mordechai, passed away February 14th of 2022. She had end-stage kidney disease, COPD, and pulmonary hypertension, which together rendered her to days and nights of being what we call the professional patient. 4 days per week hooked up to a dialysis machine, oxygen at night, and at other points over the past few years during the day too. And of course, plenty of medication, along with many trips to and stays in the hospital. While all these measures dominated her days and nights and were required to sustain her life, they weren't her life. Her family was her life. And she endured so much over the past few years to stay with us as long as she could. And while it was clear, at least over the roughly 6 months before she passed away, that the end of her life was near, together as a family, we did not discuss what we all knew was coming. Aside from conversations with my wife and close friends, It wasn't until a few months before my mom passed away, when she was becoming weaker and weaker and my father was becoming more and more frustrated and angry with what was happening before his eyes, that I had to utter, "Dad, she is dying." And it wasn't until a week or so before she died, during a conversation where I was trying to encourage her to do some physical therapy to try to build some strength, all while intellectually knowing that the end was near, did she acknowledge it too, by saying that she didn't have the strength she previously had and was going down the tubes. It was tough to hear. In retrospect, for her sake, for mine, and for our families, I wish we would have had more conversations about her impending death, even though they would have certainly been very hard and emotional conversations. Years before she was sick, and for a reason I don't remember, my mother made it a point of saying that if she were to be in a condition that would require life support, she would want all life-prolonging measures possible taken, even if unlikely to bring her back, just so we could come visit her in the hospital. And I think just in case there was a chance that she would wake up, even if the prognosis made it impossible. My dad, to the contrary, was clear and said that if it ever got to the point where such life-prolonging measures were necessary, just take him out back and finish the job. Both hard to hear and imagine. And while during the 7.5 years my mother was really sick, we did not discuss this again. My dad made it a point, even before my mother was really sick, to sign a living will and a healthcare proxy, making decision clear, legal, and on autopilot. My mother did not. And while there is no silver lining to her death, the fact that she ultimately passed away without the need to make a decision as to whether or not to put her on life support, a decision that would have ultimately fallen on my shoulders and otherwise caused our family immense stress and pain, was mercilessly made for us. As I continue to remember and honor my mother each day during the period of mourning and reflect on her life, our relationship, and the many ways she is missed, I wish as a family we would have had conversations about death prior to her death to ease her pain and ours, and while difficult, would encourage others to do the same for the comfort of themselves and their loved ones.